chickens, ducks, goats, cows, rabbits. You're listening to Homestead Grown Live, and tonight we're going to talk about the fourth pillar of the Grow Model food system, and that being animal husbandry. Okay, so again, tonight the episode is about animal husbandry, and you're listening to Homestead Grown Live. My name is, all right, my handle, I guess, is at I Know Doug on most social media, and you're welcome to follow. I closed, no, I didn't. I thought I closed my notes. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about the overall goal again of the show, and that is to help folks to learn to grow or source all or as much of their food requirements for their family as they desire. And to do that, we use the Grow Model food system, which it consists of 4 pillars. The first pillar being the plan, and that is all of the details that you would need in order to know how much of each particular ingredient you would want or need in order to supply all of the meals that you would eat for a year. And it goes in a lot more detail than that, but the overarching concept of the first pillar is the plan. The second pillar is hyper local economies, and that is the where you source some of your food that you decide not to grow or can't grow or just choose not to, but you source from as close to you as possible, including encouraging children and neighbors to get into the growing business or the raising business. And then the third model, or the third pillar, I should say, is the Grow Model gardening. And we talked about this last week, and we focused on square foot gardening in order to produce all of your, or as much of the vegetables that you intend to grow. And tonight we're going to talk about animal husbandry. And so this is obviously taking care of the animals that will produce eggs and meat and milk. But again, the goal being to help families to put these 4 pillars together is important, but it's also important to recognize where we are and the importance to start, to get started. And if you pay attention to current events, one could be tempted to jump in and try to do too much at one time. So if there's anything that we're going to get out of this episode, it would be we should start small and within our resources. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But again, well, that's what this show is actually going to be about. Its entirety is we're going to start small and we're going to stay within our resources. And that way we find success and we'll grow on our success. Okay. Got very distracted at the beginning there as the dog must have heard me talk and started barking. And so I'm very distracted, but such is life. Okay, next thing, community update. So next Thursday, I anticipate the software upgrade to the community. And at present, there's not much going on in the community. So that's to your advantage and to all of our advantage in a way. For the first 100 people, if ever the community does begin to charge for access, the first 100 people who establish user accounts at community.homesteadgrown.org. Again, community.homesteadgrown.org, not .com, but .org. The first 100 are lifetime free memberships, so long as you participate. And that participation requirement is at least 1 post per week. So I'm not going to comb through and make sure that everyone's posted each week, but if you are absent for months on end from posting, and maybe you show up and you post once and then 6 months later you're gone, you're not really active. So we'll give that founder membership, if you will, to someone else. Okay, so community.homestead.org. First 100 folks, founding members, free access for life. So on the podcast or the live show, if you will, as you're listening, I think you can push the little heart button. And I believe the more hearts we get or the more likes we get, the better for the show. And if you'll follow, so if you have a Podbean account, or if you don't, sign up for a Podbean account. I believe it's free for listeners. And if you ever decided you wanted to join the show live and call in on the Podbean app, you can push a button. And I think I'm then notified that there's someone who would like to join the show, and we can actually chat one-on-one. I'm not sure that I'm going to engage in that anytime soon, but if we do, then you'll already have an account and you'll already be signed up. But if you'll follow, then you'll get the announcement that the show's gone live, and you'll get the announcement for scheduled shows. And at present, we have shows scheduled each Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And the show so far is going about 30 minutes. Okay. So let's dive into, I think that's all the stuff I wanted. Yeah. So let's dive into animal husbandry. What do we mean by that? Well, if you're going to take animals onto your homestead or into your home or your backyard, you have a certain responsibility for those animals. Even if they are for food, they should be well taken care of. And knowing how to take care of your animals isn't that difficult, but it does require a little bit of effort. And then executing on that knowledge requires daily effort. So we're going to go at a very high level, much like we've done with the first three pillars. We're going to go to a very high level on this fourth pillar. And in future episodes, in each one of the pillars, we'll drive deeper and deeper into the details of each of those pillars. So tonight's just the high-level overview of what you can expect as we start to explore animal husbandry through the Grow Model Food System. And I'm going to focus on probably the more common animals that folks raise. And whether you're on a small homestead or a larger homestead, these are animals that you'll find most common. Okay. So the first one is, and everyone knows this one, is chickens, right? And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an idea of what amount of time, daily effort it would require to take care of chickens. And so there are scales of economy. And what I mean by that is if you have one chicken versus, say, 6 chickens, it doesn't really take you a measurable amount greater to take care of the 6 than it does the 1. So we're going to assume small numbers at this point. So you're not producing large quantities of anything to sell. These are for your own consumption. And so this is what you would expect to spend daily for, say, a flock of chickens or taking care of goats and the other animals that we'll talk about. Okay, so on average, during the summer months, you're going to spend about 5 minutes. You need to spend at least 5 minutes a day with your layer chickens and your broilers. So, and in winter, it's going to be a little bit longer because you're dealing with cold. Unless you are not in a cold climate, then you can just adjust this back to the summertime. And at first, it may take you a little bit longer. That's okay. You'll get to these targets pretty quickly. But then the other thing I'll say is you should spend some time also observing your animals for many reasons, and we'll talk about those. And so there are times that you'll go longer than 5 minutes, but on average, you're going to spend about 5 minutes for your chickens. And so this is taking your feed out to where the small flock is, say your 6 birds, and feeding and watering the birds. And if you're collecting eggs and bringing those eggs inside and washing them or wiping them off and putting them in your refrigerator. Now you may say, hey, it's going to take me more than 5 minutes. Not really. You might decide to take longer if you want to enjoy the moment and again, observe the birds and observe their how they're doing from a health perspective and their community, and are there any signs of predators and this sort of thing. But if you're just feeding, watering, collecting, and washing, then you could expect to spend 5 minutes. Sheep, same thing, about 5 minutes. Feed, water, observe, maybe as you're approaching and as you're leaving. But on the average, you're not going to spend a great deal of time with taking care of sheep on a daily basis. There are always chores that you'll have seasonal, and there are things that you'll need to do from a health perspective and vet perspective that will require more time. But we're talking about just your average daily. And then dairy goats. So I'm assuming you're milking, and I'm going to put that at 30 minutes because you want to make sure that you do everything you need to do to make sure that the environment is clean and that depending on how many goats you have, the amount of time to feed, water, milk, um, and return back to the home and um, put your milk in bottles and do what you need to do there. So we're going to call that 30 minutes, and that's probably a little generous. Pigs. Pigs, 5 minutes. Now, if you're moving your animals every day or every other day, so you're following kind of the poultry netting or the electric net, that is not factored in here. So you want to factor that in. But even with that, you'll get good at it pretty quickly, and you'll be able to move the poultry netting in short order. But it will certainly take you more than 5 minutes. And the same thing is true if you're using that for goats or for sheep. But we're going to say pig, or for pigs for that matter. Pigs, 5 minutes. Again, you're feeding, you're watering. And what I found with pigs is it took me longer to get to them because where I would keep them was generally in wooded areas or on the edge of wooded areas, so not as close to the house as some of the other animals may be. And so most of my time there spent was travel. Rabbits. You're going to spend about 5 minutes a day for rabbits. Now, depending on your numbers, and if you're breeding and where you are at in the breeding cycle, you may spend a little bit more time, but on average, feeding, watering, observing, 5 minutes. And then last, bees. And I do put bees under animal husbandry. And you could expect to spend about 15 minutes maybe at each week. If we wanted to put it in a weekly, it's not a daily task. If you're bothering your bees every day, you're bothering them too much. But if you're there once a week and checking on them, that's probably a good thing. We'll call that 15 minutes. And again, you may spend as much time traveling to them as you do caring for them. Okay, so chickens, sheep, dairy goats, pigs, rabbits, bees. There are many other, but those are the ones that I think you're going to find most common. And what I'm getting ready to share is not rocket science, and this isn't big secrets on raising animals. These are the basics, right? But it's important to consider this, and that's water. One of the first things you really come to appreciate is having clean water available for your animals. You wouldn't want to drink out. You'll hear this all the time. You wouldn't want to drink out of a dirty container. Don't make your animals drink out of a dirty container. The difference is you probably aren't going to step into your drinking container. You're not going to throw things into your drinking container, whereas the animals will. Nonetheless, it's not good for them to be drinking from soiled water or dirty water, and it's not good for you ultimately. So when you're setting up your water systems and you're thinking about water, really consider, how can I make sure that the water stays clean and is easy to clean? Because if it is difficult for you, eventually, and especially on those really cold winter days, maybe you won't, but I will. I'll put the chore off and I'll say, okay, I'll get it next time, and I'll get it next time. But if you set up your system so that it is easy to clean, then you're more likely to follow that system. And one of the things that I started doing the last time we had chickens was having two waterers, and I would bring out each day a new waterer and take the old one back so that I could properly clean it. And it was much easier to clean back at the hose than it would be out in the field. Okay. So water, very important. More so than food. Water is very important for all animals, especially in winter. In fact, on the farm here, we raise cattle. And while I don't talk about cattle necessarily for the Homestead or the Grow Model Food System, we do raise cattle. And you'll find that they actually drink more water in winter than they do in summer on average. So don't be surprised if you find that true with other animals as well. Okay, next is shelter. So shelter requirements for each animal are different. In the case of our cattle, We don't supply them with any shelter except for calving season, and even then, only if there's a lot of rain or there is a major shift in temperature. Um, we typically don't allow the cattle in the barn. And if you think about it, God didn't build barns for cattle, and so they have adapted. And they are it's natural for them not to have a roof over their head. Some other animals, they would in the wild build things for themselves, or cobble together something, or dig out a hole, and so we should provide that for them. But each animal um, has a different requirement for shelter. And just because, in the spirit of what I just said about cattle, just because they don't require it doesn't mean it isn't a good idea to provide it. So you got to balance the the if you make it too easy for them and too cushy, then as soon as there's a major shift in the weather, then you may find that the animals are too weak, or they can't adapt to it. But at the same time, if you live in a very wet area that is prone to go lots of rain and then get cold, it's probably a good idea to provide some sort of shelter in all cases, so that animals don't have they're not saturated and then it freezes. Hopefully that makes sense. But shelter is obviously important, and when you're designing your shelter, there's lots of and we'll share many episodes. Will probably cover different options for sheltering for the different animals. But when you're developing your shelters, think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And in the case, in my practice at least, I like to have everything portable and the animals moving, so that they are not stationary in one spot. So chickens, go chicken tractors, and the pigs would get moved from field to field, and the cows get moved from paddock to paddock, so that we give the grass and the soil a chance to recover. So our shelters are generally built as movable structures and not permanent structures. Okay, next is food. My view on this is, if you're going to the trouble of raising your own animals, you should probably add the extra cost of organic feed. And I don't know if I'm just lucky, but we've got a good source on organic feed that is only about, I would say, 10, maybe 11, 12% more than expensive than uh, non organic feed. And I think it's worth the difference. Again, if you look at dollar for dollar what you are replacing by growing or raising the food yourself, and you had to go buy it in a grocery store, and you do a side-by-side analysis, you're going to find that extra feed cost is probably worth it. If you don't value clean food, and what I mean by clean food is you don't value non-GMO organic food, then it's not going to make sense to you to spend the extra dollars, as few as they may be. But if you do value it, then it is absolutely worth it. I wouldn't convince yourself that, hey, I'm raising myself, therefore it's better. It probably still is better, but take the extra step. Okay, and then the last is diseases, or not the last, but the diseases. Get to know the common diseases and related symptoms of the animals that you're raising. And then as you're observing your animals, you're looking for signs of those things. There's a reason that, there's probably the top 5 diseases that you would find with chickens and goats and sheep. And they shouldn't be terribly difficult to identify the major things. And then spend some time observing your animals. Enjoy that time, by the way, too. It's time to be outside, and it's quiet generally, and hopefully you never experience a situation where you find an animal that is showing signs of disease or weakness. But I guarantee you will at some point. And knowing what those things are, and then further knowing how to treat them, or what you can treat versus what you would need a vet for, is going to bring you a certain peace of mind. Right? So if you know, here's the top 5 things, and look, this matches the symptoms of this animal and how they're acting match one of these top 5, and it just so turns out that here's how I resolve this myself, then you can set out to resolve it. Or when you call the vet, you can let the vet know here's what it is, and everyone then is on the same page, And you may find that occasionally you can run into some unique, exotic things, but then you'll learn, right? You'll learn for the next time. But in many cases, if you have clean water, good shelter, and high quality food for your animals, and they are living in a less stress environment, you may find that the frequency of disease is less and less. But know what they are, know what the related symptoms are, know how best to prevent them, and then if you get them, how to treat them, and then if you can't treat them, um, how to communicate it to your vet, which is probably not a bad idea to have a relationship with a vet, um, just in case you do need them, so that you've established who you are, you have an account, they know where you live. If they had to show up, um, it wouldn't be an emergency that they didn't know you existed. Okay. Okay. Next, let's talk a little bit about common terms. I could go through a table of common terms, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to suggest to you that you may want to, when you think about your different animals, so in the case of chickens, sheep, goats, pigs, and rabbits, know what a female is commonly referred to. So actually, I'll walk through one of these. So with chickens, a female is called a hen, right? A male is called a rooster, and that everyone knows that. But everyone doesn't know some of the other animals, but get to know whatever your animals are, get to know what those names are, because you'll hear them time and time again. And if you do need to refer to a talk with a vet, then you'll understand what they're talking about many times. But also get to know what a young animal is called. So in the case of a chicken, we've got a female is a hen, a male is a rooster. A young chicken is called a chick. A castrated male is called a capon or a stag. And then also get to know what their normal temperature would be. This kind of goes back to our diseases, but just the general health of your animal. 107.5 degrees is the normal temp for a chicken. Get to know when their age of puberty is, because in most cases we're going to try to be sustainable, which means we'll be breeding a lot of our own animals. We're going to want to know how long or how old that animal needs to be before they've reached puberty. So in the case of a chicken, that's between 4 and 6 months, generally speaking. And then incidence of heat and duration of heat that isn't applicable to a chicken, but it is to other animals. Get to know what those are. For instance, in a sheep, the instance of heat is 13 to 19 days, and the duration of heat is 3 to 72 hours. So those are important things to know. And then also gestation. So in the case of a chicken, gestation is 21 days. So if you have an egg and you're incubating that egg, or you have broody birds sitting on that egg, you would expect it to hatch within 21 days. And then what is the average productive lifespan of those animals? So in the case of a chicken, you're looking about 2+ years, probably 3 on the Homestead, 4 or 5. But eventually you'll start to notice a dramatic drop in production. And that's up to you and your personal situation and finances, whether you carry that chicken, even though it's only producing 1 egg a week, or you use your cull chickens for soup stock, right? So get to know the common terms and the helpful facts for your animals. And having those facts probably at memory is not a bad idea. So knowing what the normal temperature is, age of puberty, instance of heat, duration of heat, gestation, probably not a bad idea to have those committed to memory. So if you remember, we started off talking about the big thing in this episode is really about starting small and within your resources. If let's say you have all sorts of money and you can go out and build infrastructure, and it doesn't matter to you, you can instantly pay someone to come in and put everything in that you need, and you can stock chickens, sheep, goats, pigs, and rabbits, and bees. Do you have the time to do it? Do you have the knowledge to do it? So every situation is different. And you should really think about what your situation is. And you should think about what your carrying capacity is. So if you have a small backyard and you think you're going to have all of the above, it could be very overwhelming. And if you have neighbors, you may find yourself at odds with neighbors because you have a small zoo on a tenth of an acre lot. I'm just making that up. But or if you decide, hey, I want to have 100 chickens, and you have a very small backyard, you may want to rethink it. But you know what your capacity is, in it basically, and you know what your comfort level is, and don't go outside of those, especially initially. But I would say, well, don't go outside your comfort level as far as um, what you're willing to put forth in an effort. Okay, but do go outside of your comfort level as far as your knowledge. Because one of the things that I think I learned is, and my wife actually helped with this lesson, which when we first got our cattle, we bought two bull calves. We actually had to bottle feed them. And it was really more of a, we're going to get off the ground. We don't really know 100% of what we're doing, but we're going to get off the ground, and we're going to do so with two bull calves. And we did. We bottle fed those animals, and one of them turned out to be quite a good herd sire. The other one, not so much, but it didn't matter. The education was well worth the carrying cost of that animal. And so I would suggest that don't wait until you know everything. You're never going to know everything. Get started, but don't overwhelm yourself with tasks until you master one. Then you can go on to the next one, but don't wait until you know everything to get started. But some things to consider, obviously, are your financial situation. How much money do you have for infrastructure? How much money do you have to purchase stock? A chicken is a relatively inexpensive purchase, but a goat might be more significant. So obviously your finances are your finances, and you know what those are, so you know what you can afford. But often you're going to look at, what are we spending today on chicken, milk, pork, and part of what the plan portion or plan pillar of the Grow Model Food System, it will show us exactly how much we will need in order to provide all of that particular ingredient for a year. And you may find that if you buy that at a grocery store or you source it elsewhere, it's a pretty significant cost. Whereas if you raised it yourself, you may find that it is actually less expensive. So don't consider feed cost by itself as an extra expense when you, at the end of the cycle, will end up with meat in your freezer, or eggs in your refrigerator, or milk in your refrigerator. But other things to consider are the land. How many acres do you have? How much land do you have? Is there fencing on that land? Will you need to pay for fencing to be put in? What kind of fencing are you comfortable with? Are you comfortable with temporary fence? Do you have fence that would support goats? Just because you have a fence on your property doesn't mean that you can keep goats behind it. Chickens will fly over fence unless you clip their wings, of course. But these are things that we need to consider, and why you shouldn't try to do everything all at once, but instead start with one thing, master it, get comfortable with it, and then move on to the next. Housing. What kind of housing do the animals need? Do you need a barn? How big does that barn need to be, considering how many animals you're planning on putting into that barn? Do you need portable housing in the case of broilers for chickens? What's the cost of that housing for the number of broilers that you need? Maybe you start with what your finances say that you can afford, and let the cost savings of your broilers pay for the expansion, right? So if the number of chickens, organic chickens that you are able to produce, and you would normally eat 2 chickens a week, and you're saving $20 a week, then in a couple of months you would have enough saved up from raising yourself to purchase another the resources to build another portable coop or chicken tractor. Hopefully this is making sense. And of course, the last thing that is unique to you that I've listed here is time. You know how much time you have. I listed what the time is, the daily time is, but if you have 30 minutes for dairy goats, or if you have 10 minutes for chickens and sheep. And again, those are daily. You're going to have weekly and monthly and seasonal times as well. But you know how much time you have available and what your situation is. There was a time for me when I was commuting 2 hours a day, and so my time was very limited. But working from home has freed up 2 hours a day, so all that time can be redirected. Of course, most of it goes towards being with the family, but um, it's more time that became available to me. You know your situation. Okay, so I think that's it. A couple things in closing. Um, it's really important that there's a number of reasons it's important, but I never want to find my family in a situation where food forces stress decision making. There's a number of ways you can approach that. One way is if you have a ton of cash, you can stock up on, lots of dry goods and long-term storable foods, and you can have a certain sense of confidence in that if supply lines and the supply chains broke down and food wasn't at the grocery store, or you weren't allowed to go to the grocery store to get that food, that you would be able to weather that storm. Um, but that isn't sustainable, right? If it's just purchased, it's not sustainable unless your income and your ability to continue to purchase it from that source is sustainable. But the ability for you to grow it yourself and source it from very nearby neighbors who hopefully, as you communicate with them and as you're sharing, are on the same page as you, um, it's very important. I had a situation during the pandemic where at our grocery store, if you didn't put on a mask, you could not go into the grocery store. And a lot of folks would say, well, just put on the mask. Sure, okay, just put on the mask. But what's the next step? The next step was, and I know in some places it was, you have to be vaccinated. And then a lot of people would say, you just go ahead and get the vaccine. No, that's the hill for me to die on. I don't want to be forced into making decisions because my family is hungry or could be hungry. At the same time, there's a certain sense of peace in being able to know that I can produce the food. Not necessarily that I'm doing it all, but if I have the ability to scale up to do it all, right? So let's say all I'm doing now is producing 10% of my food, but should I need to, I could scale to 80, 90% because I have established the infrastructure. I have built up my skill set, and I have the seed stock, whether that be seed stock in plants, fruit trees, or animals. If I have all of those, then I can, in relatively short order, scale up to supply more and more. And if I have a year's supply or more in reserve while I'm scaling up, then less stress and more joy in the process. And hopefully never need to use it, right? Never need to scale up. I might want to, but never need to. And that's the difference. Okay, so thank you for joining us this evening. Remember, follow on the podcast, like on the podcast, comment on the podcast. I think that's another one of those metrics that they look at. And then those engagements help the show get more visibility, and I'll get better and better as we go along. We're going to get more into this, and the whole goal for all of us is together we're going to work towards this. We're going to walk through building out the plan step by step, using all the grow models for vegetables, for fruits, for berries, for animals, for storage, for preservation. And again, this isn't necessarily a homesteading type of a podcast or website. It's really more about the production of food. It can be you could be in a high-rise apartment building, but if you're able to source your food from a farmer that's 10 miles away, we're going to build the model out that tells you how much you need, when you need it, in order for you to put it into your storage capacity for the amount of time that you can for what you have. That's the whole goal. We're going to work through all those things together as a community. So thank you for joining us, and have a great night and a great weekend. Thank you so much. Good night.